Well, good morning and welcome to the African American Genealogy Society and our topics for today. And this is our monthly session. So let me share my screen here and get started. Well, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to get together and share information together. This is going to be an intense meeting today in the sense that we're going to cover three separate topics. So this is what we call our Saturday sessions. Okay, and the three topics for today are again using city directories, using cluster research, in genealogy using Social Security information. And this is really going to be the short version because others can very well be a much longer version as time progresses. The first one I want to do is talk about cluster research, and again it will include using fan techniques. The first question is what is cluster research? Well, it really talks about examining the clusters of individuals who lived in your ancestors' community, and friends, peers, neighbors, coworkers, and other members of that community, and we call it part of the fan club: friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. Now, in contrast, there's another one called collateral research, and this one is important also because it investigates your non-direct line ancestors. And again, you may not share much DNA with your great-great-granduncle, but records of him can lead to records of your own ancestor. Now, where do we do cluster research? Certain records mention multiple people and thus are more likely to include other members of your community. Take a look at them. Census, and again, they're organized geographically with family groups and neighborhoods together. And again, they're not alphabetical because the particular enumerator, again, had a particular path, and it may not be a direct path. City directories, which we'll talk a little bit later on about, really is a snapshot of the community at a particular period of time. And the thing I like about it, it includes business owners, tradespeople, plus your ancestors' business partners. Now, vital records, birth, DECA, and the like can include witnesses, informants, and sponsors. And many are likely to be your ancestors' relatives, the close friends. Now, one that has been very, very important to me is newspapers, particularly the obituaries. And again, the birth, death, marriage, and anniversary notices, and the other big item in the newspapers are the social and gossip columns. Because remember, the newspapers were the Facebook of the time. So again, it provides tremendous amount of information. Another source, wills and probate records. And here you can find heirs, next of kin, and relationships among surviving family members. Another big one is land transfers. My fourth great grandfather gave his a son land in Massachusetts, and in Middlesex County, it is recorded and shown. Military records, and particularly pension records in certain time periods, do mention the next of kin. And in the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, there were applications for bound land records. And again, to get those, you had to have testimonials from people to indicate that you in fact were there and did serve. So why should you search clusters and collateral relatives? Because one of the key things you'll find about is you get closer to the documents that you're looking for, and you get a broader picture of the community as it existed. And I might point out that cluster and collateral research are most useful when you hit the proverbial brick wall. Now, it can help with such challenges as missing links to a previous generation or direct ancestors family, unknown biographical details, a biggie, difficult to trace ancestors. Again, immigrants who recently came to the US, women, slave ancestors, and adoptees. So again, those are a category of people that are, in some cases, very, very difficult. Another big one is individuals who have the same name. And again, how do you differentiate between them? Now, another biggie for us, ancestors born before 1850. And again, and the reason is because there may be only a very few records that exist. It also will allow you to answer questions about your ancestors' identity, kinship, or even family events. Now, how do you do it? Now, this, I have to like this process. Again, you're talking about gathering information that you already have, organizing it in a form that you, again, can see what is there. Then you can identify the gaps. And it will allow you to do a couple of things. Create research questions, but also create a research plan. Then you do the research itself, in no matter whatever form it may take, and then you analyze your findings and draw conclusions. Was I able to answer my research questions? Did I follow my research plan? Are there other things I need to do? And it may be you may need to repeat the process again for another person that you found who is closely related and may provide you additional information. Now, this is a quick review here. One of the key things, when you study your ancestors in the context of their community, it's a great way to solve family mysteries. And I'll give an example, a bunch of examples. If you can't find an ancestor's parents' names, you might be able to go sideways to be able to identify a brother and maybe the parents. Another problem, getting ancestors confused with someone else in the neighborhood because of the same name and age. And again, you may straighten out the process by identifying wives, children's, siblings, and neighbors. You may want to understand why your ancestor migrated to a particular place or took a particular job. In my case, my grandfather and great-grandfather emigrated from Canada, Nova Scotia, to the United States. And that was done roughly around 1908. And again, trying to figure out why they came. And again, it ended up being jobs in the area of Nova Scotia in that time frame. Living was very, very difficult. And they, in fact, came to Massachusetts to find, again, employment. But one of the key things that I want to point out from my family was that other family members from different family groups came as well. Brothers, Cunninghams, Stevensons, all different family groups came together into Massachusetts. You can start by looking at a group sheet, and which would include the name, birth, marriage, and death dates, and perhaps the spouse's name. Again, the basic information. This is what I call the cornerstone for developing information. And then cluster research candidates include others who appear in certain records, neighbors in the census. And I do want to point out, as I mentioned before, in the census, it's interesting because, as I said, the enumerator took their own route in that context. And when it does, again, you may find other relatives 4 or 5 pages ahead or 4 or 5 pages afterwards in that context. So it's not alphabetical by any stretch of the imagination. But again, witnesses to marriages, naturalization records. Naturalization records, again, I have for my grandfather. His parents, when they immigrated, always remained aliens here in the United States. They never were naturalized. And so I found that out. Other family members were. Matter of fact, all of my grandfather's brothers and sisters were naturalized citizens. And again, as you look, a biggie was obituaries for me. And again, I had my second great uncle, LeCount Burgess. I found information for his sister and 2 brothers, but I couldn't find a death record for him. I eventually found it using newspapers. It told me where he died, when he died, and where he was buried. And again, it didn't surprise me because the burial cemetery is in fact a big African-American cemetery outside Washington, D.C., actually located in Maryland. As you look at some of these records, note other families because they may be related to you. Growing up, there were other families that I met but never knew I was related to or how I was related to them. But again, as you do your research, you're doing cluster research, it may allow you to answer that question. Who are they? How am I related? And how did they get here? And how did I get here in terms of the location that I am? Another big one is note if your ancestors' neighboring families, again, for those particularly that came from Europe and other areas, report the same birthplaces for their parents and children. Did they migrate together? And again, that may be a large case in point. So again, people come here early and then reach back to bring back their relatives and friends, and they all come from the same area. So again, it's another indicator for you. Now, in conclusion, with this one, and I'll open it up for quick questions as far as that goes. This is a vital source for you to use, and cluster research can be done using all kinds of records. But the key thing is setting up a research plan that allows you to determine the kinds of records that may provide you an answer. I don't know if you have any questions in the question box yet, or any questions to the folks here. This is a quick and dirty in that situation, but again, it gives you some insights in terms of how important it is to look at the friends and neighbors around you. One of the key things, when I look at my brother's family in Boston, in the Roxbury area, they did not live next door to one another. They were scattered all over Roxbury. So again, if I looked at a census for a particular area, they may not be on that particular page. And that's why I say it's critical to understand, where people lived and how they moved and migrated. So any questions before I pick up the next topic? Okay, good. And if you want to say the questions to the end, that's fine too. One of the key things I like are using city directories. And I put down below, it can be used in between censuses and in place of other records. And that's crucial. Now, what is a city directory? They've been around for a long time. The first ones were published within a couple of years after the American Revolution, and directories were initially created by craftsmen and salesmen to contact local residents and potential customers. When I lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire in the 70s, I was in 2 city directories. And again, Portsmouth, New Hampshire is one of the oldest communities in the United States, and as far as that goes. And the house I owned was built in 1865. And I was, as a family, the 3rd family owner, as far as that goes, since 1865. So my family and I were in 2 census records, city directories in that sense. And when I looked at the city directory for the year that the house was built, 1865, I found out who the owner of the house was. He worked at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. He was a clerk in the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. I found out who his family members were. So again, that was just a quick snapshot of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and particularly my ancestor at that particular period. In this case, the ancestor for the fellow who built the house. It's very, very interesting. Now, do want to give you a little bit of background. In New York City, city directories were printed between 1786 and 1934. Well, let's put this in a context. The first telephone books began to appear in the late 1870s. So again, you have 2 different kinds of directories, a city directory and a telephone book. Both of them are critical to doing genealogy. Now, what can a city directory contain? Well, I like city directories. They're a great resource, and some contain a brief local history. It may have a map that includes a street guide and where the city wards boundaries were. It'll include, in many cases, a population of the local city and sometimes the surrounding areas. We'll talk a little more about that. It may talk about who was in the city fire and police departments and how it was organized. It also will talk about city and county officials, and may also include information about the courts, the court officers, and federal officers. But another big one for us, it can contain a list of local churches, a separate list of the clergy by name. And the next one is a biggie, is the cemeteries that existed at that time. Because one of the things you want to find out, again, my part of my family lived in Groton, Mass. Early Groton had old Groton burial ground, then a new Groton burial ground, and then a later city Groton burial ground. But you have to know the time frame in which they existed to understand where family members may be buried. So that helps tremendously. It also can list the schools and universities, and sometimes a listing of the staff for either one of them. So it's a great resource for you to understand how that community is comprised. Other things that it can have information on hospitals, orphanages, and homes. I might point out, the other one you might point out are in asylums also. Would it be, again, for tuberculosis or an insane asylum? It may also have information about fraternal lodges and social organizations. So again, it's another touch point for you to understand your relatives. What I liked about it, it lists the residents by name and by street. And in many cases, collected with the names and spouses' names, often in parentheses, and whether they are a widow, and also provide the lead person's occupation and address. So this is a great way to do collateral research, to locate friends and neighbors and relatives in the listings by street address. It also may include a business directory listed alphabetically and by type, and that's critical. That's how I found my uncle, my great-grandfather, Albert Monroe, and it listed his business. He was a mason, a brick mason. So again, and the family lore said early on that, again, he helped build the first Catholic church in that community. Well, he could very well have, because being a brick mason, there weren't that many of in the area at the time. And the ads for businesses that chose this option to advertise, like he did. And again, it was a great way for him to advertise. It also talks about the newspapers and publications at that time in that community. So again, it's a great way to look at the resources open to you relative information from a directory. Now, I always like to take a step back and say, when did it first start, the city directories? Well, it talks about April 14th, 1785, the announcement that Mr. John McPherson undertook to publish the number of the houses, then published a record of the names of the inhabitants of the city. It's Baltimore, Maryland. So that the earliest one was 1785. Now, the first directory in New York City was published in 1786. So again, as you look at the record types, begin to recognize that there's some very, very old records that are open to us. And it's another tool. And as I mentioned, this tool is available in between census records, because the census records are taken every 10 years in the United States. And since some of my relatives are from Canada, that when you're off. So again, if the census is 1900 here, their census would be taken in 1901. Now we have a 72-year requirement before the census can be released. They have a 100-year requirement. So again, it's much more difficult, again, to do research in that area. And I just quick listed information provided by the New York Public Library. It did a great bit of information providing on the history of city directories, particularly theirs. I want to back up one and mention Mr. John McPherson is a very interesting man, a very colorful man. He was a naval captain with the British Navy before the Revolution. Once the Revolution started, he went with the Patriots. So again, he was a very, very wealthy man. He built a mansion in New York and did a whole host of other things. So again, the name John McPherson is an interesting one if anyone wanted to really look him up. So the question is, where can we find them? Well, there's a card catalog and directories in Ancestry. They have city directories from 1821 to 1989, and you can filter to a location. The Allen County Public Library has two things: microfilm and books. So again, I picked out a book from 1864 from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, gave me information on the inhabitants of New Hampshire in 1864. So again, and also I might point out the businesses that existed there and other things. Also, again, there's microfilm here and microfilm readers. So again, it provides you an opportunity to look at these options in terms of where you might find them. So why city directory? Well, most of them were updated yearly. Portsmouth was every 2 years, but most of them are updated yearly. And the addresses that you can find may allow you to find other things: census records, military records, and the like. and it can place your relative in a particular location at a unique particular time. One of the things it can also do is provide the occupations and the addresses to allow you to differentiate between people with the same name. Last name Jones, last name Smith, the first name, may very well be very, very similar, particularly in big cities. And it can also affect smaller communities as well. As I mentioned, you can find the addresses for cemeteries, churches, and other businesses. Now, how can I use this? When you go to Ancestry, you can do it two ways. And I'll show you, the way that I typically do it ends up being with just a particular name and location. When you browse their collection, you're able to see if a particular directory exists in that area at that particular period of time. And there are ways you can do it. Use just the last name only in a particular time frame, rather than a whole name, because it may give you a different answer. And why do I say that? Well, on my grandfather's death certificate is listed. His name is Oni. It was Lewis Owen Brothers, but again, his family knew him as Oni. The record said Oni. If I looked Oni Brothers, I wouldn't find him. So if I looked under brothers, I'd have a broader collection of people to choose from and recognize using an address that would be him, and also his particular occupation. As you look at other people on the page with the same surname, the keys are locations, whether they're a homeowner, a boarder, renter, their spouse, whether they're widowed, their occupation and business. So again, these are the differentiators between the U.S. Census and this. Yes, the census does indicate whether you're a renter in many cases or a homeowner. It does indicate whether a person is widowed or not, but it may or may not uniquely specify the occupation and the business. Certain census records did do that, others did not. So again, as you look at this particular resource, it's a fantastic resource. Another key thing is when you look, and I'll show you in a few minutes, check the front matter. In other words, the front few pages for abbreviations and a list of contents. So it'll provide you better insights in terms of how to interpret that particular line of information for your particular relative. And one of the fun things that you can do, once you have the address, you can Google it and perhaps get a picture of the location itself. And again, the house that is there, but may or may not be the same house, just depending upon the time for it. In Boston, there's some cases where with some real old houses. Boston, I can tell you that, coming back from particularly early 1800s. So it may give you a better picture and some better insights in terms of how your relative lived in that time period. I do want to point out something else, and I'll just mention here briefly. Using maps is another great tool. Again, early maps. Early maps of Portsmouth, New Hampshire listed the owner of the house and the house number on the map itself. Again, the map, Portsmouth wasn't big at that period of time, so it gave you some information. There's things called the Sanborn fire maps for bigger communities that gave you tremendous information about the community itself. So again, maps, whether in the front of the directory or separate, can provide you all kinds of information. As we continue with the how, again, the key thing here is to look at others with the same name. And the differentiator is going to be the address or occupation. And the last one, which is interesting, if a woman is listed as a widow, you can perhaps use that information to narrow down her husband's death date, particularly in communities in which they produced a directory every year. For example, if he was alive and listed as a head of household, again, in 1890, but his wife is widowed in 1891, you've got a window of information. And I do want to point out the fact that the information in the directory is typically 1 year out of date. So they'll collect the information, for example, in 1889, but it's published in 1890. It takes that length of time to publish it. So it gives you some insights. Now, here's some helpful hints for searching city directories. Always look at the front of the book for abbreviations that are going to be used throughout. And a big one here, again, in much smaller communities, don't stop with the first alphabetical list that you find, because depending upon the directory itself, there may be several smaller communities listed in the same directory. And let me give you a case in point. In the phone directory for Auburn, Indiana, there were 4 other communities listed in that directory as an example. That's just a phone directory. That wasn't the city directory. So again, it gives you some insights. That was a way of collecting information about a much larger community. And one of the key things, if you already know your ancestors' occupation, perhaps from the census, be sure to take that extra step and see if you can find the business in the directory itself. That may give you some more insights. And that's fun to build a better picture of the history of the community itself as it existed at that time frame. Now, here's one fun thing. City directories obviously can provide a wealth of information. You can find information about your relatives when you can't find them in the census. And city directories can provide information for the 1890 missing U.S. census that was lost in a fire. So again, if there's a city directory, it can provide just as much information, or even more so, than that 1890 census would. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to research where's it? This one here. Here it is. Gotta get back to the right place here. Okay. I'm going to do a little research on my great uncle, what I had difficulty trying to find here. And he went by LeCount. His first name was Edward, but at a particular period of time, he went by LeCount. Born about 1890, and he lived in the District of Columbia. So the very first thing I'm going to do is do the broadest search first and show you once I found that. Now, this is an example of the city directory itself. You don't see, there it is there. You're not seeing it on that? Okay, let me get back. I apologize. Let me see here what happened here. Okay. Yep, I gotta go back here to share the screen again. New share, okay. There it is. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I can see it now, right? That's not mine for some reason. Okay, here it is right here. LeCount Burgess, manager. 1907, he's a renter in 1907 S Street Northwest. And he was a renter all of his life, adult life. So again, I knew the owners of the place in which he lived and everything else. I did research on them as well. But I do want to put a couple of other things on this when you look at it. When you look at Lily, widow of Henry W., again, information, okay? Yes, you had a question. Ancestry, yep. Okay, initially what I just want to show you just a way to search, and then you'll have a whole host of information. There's another one. I go back, I'll show you again. There's a whole. You can narrow it further if you only wanted, city directories or the like. There's a box for that. There's also a card catalog as well. But I wanted to show you this first to give you some insights in terms of what some of these things look like. And this is for 1930. When I want to do something, I want to point out something else on the front here. Oh, can do. Okay. Okay. Yep. Okay. Now, an example, what is this now? This is an example of information that's provided. This one talked about census data of U.S. cities of 30,000 inhabitants or more in 1928. An example of additional information here. Also talks about a alphabetical directory of all of the business concerns and private citizens. Talks about what was included and it was published by R.L. Polk in Washington, D.C. Now, this is the index to advertisers. So again, you'd find the advertisements in the back, typically. It has its introduction, talking about the population of just under 600,000, of the 5 major departments in the area. History of Washington, D.C. Oh, I don't remember the question. What was your question again? Oh, how do I get to it? And again, when I come back, I'll show you how I actually got to it again. All right, I just want to go through a little bit on what's here. We talked about the government information again, and who was in charge in that particular period of time. So it gives you a good quick view of a community at that time. And it lists, again, the key things, House of Representatives and the Senate. So again, Washington D.C. Would have an awful lot more information than much smaller communities. Okay, let me go back here. But this should give you some insights in terms of how that process evolves. So let me go back and show you what I did. I went to all categories first. and I'll go to this one in a few minutes. I then put in my, if you look on the right-hand side here, you have a whole host of potential areas. One of the key ways of differentiating it would be city and area directories. And I can do the same thing again, just as I did. Put my great uncle's name in. Now, the reason I did it this way in this case was I knew he lived in the District of Columbia. Now, somebody may be born in one location, but live years later in another. But one of the differentiators would be their date of birth in that sense. So again, we should come out roughly with this, roughly the same answers. Again, 1930, yep, that was the one we talked about, 1927, 1926, 37. And again, it just gives you, and and if you notice the spelling differences, it's LeCount, then E LeCount. His first name I said was Edward, so consequently, it gives you some insights along that line. So I'm able to, at least at the first bunch here, get to using a name. Now, another way, yeah, let's see here. Let me do it the other way. Okay, because of the title. Let me do it this way. So you see all kinds of city directories, registers directories in this case. So if I wanted the Quebec city, I'd go to Quebec here. So again, this is a much larger view of the collection itself in terms of directories. And you could, in fact, filter by dates, even with this one here. Okay. So let's go to Massachusetts and see what I have here. Okay, now I could, in fact, I'm gonna put the year. Let's see what comes up. There's the Lewis Brothers and Company here, for example. But these are the ways that you can search this particular system. And I found it to be interesting, as I say, because when you take a look at this, let's see what's on this one here. This is the Boston Business Directory. Yeah. So again, the key here is going to Ancestry on the home page and deciding what you want to search. And there are quick links. And again, schools, directories, and church histories are right on that front page. So it gives you some insights along that line. So it's interesting for me to look at city directories because they evolve over time and information changes a little bit. And information from one directory to another need not be consistent, meaning that one may provide more information than the other. So if you know your ancestor lived in a particular location, give it a shot and see if there's a directory. And as I pointed out, let's get back here. Okay. I have found this to be one of the most important resources that that I can use. And you did see when I pointed out that it also had Canadian directories as well. So again, since I've got relatives in Canada, that can help me quite a bit in my respective search. And I pointed out here, there's a if everybody will or if and Guzzi, if you have email addresses for everybody who attends, I will send them a handout from this as far as that goes. Let you send it out. So again, as I said, his name was Edward LeCount Burgess, and he went by Edward Burgess from 1890 to about 1910. After 1910, he went LeCount. I don't know why he did that. I have no idea. And the last one, as I say, this is just a quick view of certain kinds of research. Okay, go ahead. Sure. Okay, I'm not seeing it. I've got a different screen here.
Okay,
but what's the question?
I will share it with you. Judy Casey is asking, when researching cemeteries in city directories, did you find that African American cemeteries were identified?
I grew up in the North, so for the most part, we did not have separate we did not have separate African American cemeteries. There may be plots in certain areas that were designated for African Americans, but that would maybe one a good question for. Oh yeah, yes, I can say that. Yes, I did. Harmony Cemetery, outside of Washington D.C., was a Black-only cemetery. So the answer is yes, you can find them, and it would be listed that way too. As a matter of fact, I forgot to mention in city directories, depending upon the time frame and location, they would indicate whether someone was colored or not. Oh yes, big time, yes. And that was more predominant in the South than in the North, as far as that goes. In the South, it tend to be more predominant in a descriptor of someone's race in a city directory in the South than in the North. Did you see one in New York? Well, what time? The question is the time period that you saw it in. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. In my research, doing a variety of locations, and particularly in the Midwest, I have found that certain communities were more likely to mention with a code. You've talked about the code in the front of the directory,
Right.
And it has a grid there or listing that says what those codes are. And I have found them to be present in even Fort Wayne.
Sure. And it makes sense. So
that they said colored, or it would mention if they were colored or not. The code is there,
Yep.
and as is listed in the directory, that code is present. And that's the Midwest. Now, I think probably more in the New England states, it was less likely to show. It's not to say that all of them didn't, though. But I have seen a variety of locations across the country where it does specify that that person is colored. That was the code that was on there, yeah. It was, I think it's beneficial to note that this is happening, of course, after the Civil War, but it most certainly did code them if they were a free person of color prior to the Civil War. So you just really, I would, genuinely speaking, in the New England states, once again, you might find that. My experience I don't have near, he's from New England, obviously, Dr. Brothers is, and he's traveled throughout. But just recently, I had the privilege of going to some cemeteries in the Rhode Island area. And like a lot of northern cemeteries, they didn't have separate Black cemeteries, but they had separate areas of the cemetery. And they almost always have some sort of, well, they're starting to identify those areas. They're starting to identify those areas with banners or memorial plaques or something of that nature that lets you know that this is the African-American section of the cemetery. I happen to be, fortunately, in Rhode Island, in Warwick, Rhode Island, and they were in the process of doing a memorial program. And they had already put up the signage. They had replaced quite a few headstones that were as old as 1720 something, that they were actually replacing the headstones. So the more research that we are doing as a societal members or genealogical researchers, the more things are starting to come to light. So I would say that there are norms, which is what Dr. Brothers is referring to. Normally, that's where it was in that area, but it really does depend on who occupied the area and who was controlling. I've been in and out of the room a couple of times, and the reason for me leaving the room, Dr. Brothers and I had discussed previously, some of the city directories have listings in the South primarily of plantation owners. And this is something that I have not heard spoken about very often in the various group gatherings that we've had for research. And by working here in the genealogy department and going through collections as they're being added to the collection, I had the privilege of seeing a lot of things before anybody else knew we had them. And at the same time, it would trigger me to do other research to say, well, we got this, what about that, type thing. And so I have seen in the southern areas where they have the planters guide, and planters being plantation owners. So if they have listings of planters in that city directory group, then you want to look and see if there is a plantation that you've heard the ancestors speak of, that your family has conversed on, or for that matter, that there was sharecropping that was done later on, Jim Crow area. These planters may connect to your ancestors, giving you a name to pursue as far as probate records are concerned, possible other civil records that might exist that your ancestors might have been mentioned. I had hoped to be able to pull a copy, but I admitted, my overdrive was slowed down a little bit, but I did confirm that there are some. I was looking just momentarily ago, excuse the lighting situation here. I did momentarily ago find that Birmingham, Alabama, for example, they have a planters section saying, that, but it's not as detailed as the ones that I would like to share. But if you're in an area, if you're looking in your area, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, that sort of thing, you want to go to the city directory of, and I would say pre-Civil War, to get a better idea and see what if there's information in the front of those directories referencing planters. Also, as you're looking at the individual names that are listed in the city directories, and that person's name comes up as a planter, then you are more than likely going to find a plantation associated with that name. So it's the deep dig that we keep talking about, and also out of the box, that you want to turn the corner and take a look at something else. And it is completely different than what, as Dr. Brothers is pointing out, farmers of the North who are not quote unquote classified as plantation owners, but they have people working on the land. And so you still want to dig a little bit deeper in terms of the civil records associated with those individuals.
And again, the agricultural information.
Mm.
What was the agriculture information associated with the census is a great way, you know, again, in the 1800s, they had an agricultural censuses. And that was one way of recognizing them. The other way, if you want to do it quite honestly, is our tax records. Because those are the two main records that these individuals, including my great grandfather, again, was a farmer. And again, I can find information on this farm. Oh, okay.
Well, it said so. Okay, can you hear me now? All right. So what Dr. Brothers referred to as agricultural census and tax records, as far as the area that you're looking into that might share some additional information about your ancestors being on the grounds at that time. And those agricultural records are in addition to the census population records. And it does oftentimes give the number of enslaved people on that farm or on that plantation, or laborers that are on that farm or plantation. But good resources to go to, because it does lead you to other records as well. Okay.
Oops. Well, let me mute myself here.
I wanted to also say that as you're looking at the city directories, the businesses as they are listed, you might hear something. Maybe an ancestor of yours had a specific trade. He was an artisan or some of, had a special skill like that. Finding out what the businesses are like that in the area are also good to look at, because we all know that quite often our ancestors were contracted out to do work when they had specific skills. So that's another thing to familiarize yourself with as you're looking through the city directories. And then I'll turn that back over to Dr. Brothers.
Well, thank you, Roberta. It's interesting. You know, again, as we talked about, one record would lead to another. And so thank you very much for that information. It gives me more insights as well. Our last topic. Okay.
There's still one comment, and that's from Victoria Brower. She says, regarding city directories, as she found in her family research, some women may not be widowed, but list themselves as widowed rather than list themselves as divorced or separated.
Okay, did I get it? Yeah. All right. So to that end, Victoria was the one that asked that question. And thank you for the question, Victoria. I think also that we shouldn't assume that the individual themselves are identifying themselves like that. Quite often with public records being gleaned, there's people that are hired to go out and do that, the census taker example. They oftentimes, and let's keep in mind the tragedy of bondage of slavery, that women did not volunteer to have children out of wedlock. Let's get that straight. That was a business that the enslavers utilized. And so many women coming into the census for the first time in 1870 are being identified as widows, and there are compassionate people out there. It is notated that oftentimes an enumerator, especially if she was a woman, she might identify the person who is the head of household, mother of 4 children, as a widow. just out of courtesy, just out of common civil courtesy, because she may not know where that father is anymore. She may know that that father was sold off someplace or another, but she doesn't know if he's dead or alive because he's been torn away from the family. So they would say widow, and it would not be the woman herself actually saying that. They took it upon themselves to do that quite often. There's some other literature that I've read in the past that verifies that information. So it's not necessarily the person that's saying that she's a widow. It may be the person that's actually taking the information, and they do that to just make things go smoother, I think, maybe.
I think Victoria's talking about in-city directors who were asked that question.
Again, sometimes it's assumed.
No more questions then? Okay, we'll get started. Thank you for the, again, for providing us additional information to discuss. I appreciate it. Our last topic is going to be using Social Security information. And this is a fantastic tool to support your genealogy research. Now, one of the key things I always ask myself is what are Social Security benefits? And one of the key things that always comes up are retirement income. Again, either can be guaranteed by a company through a defined benefit pension plan, or there is a federally funded Social Security program. And it's a guaranteed program for older Americans, and it's funded through a tax paid by both employees and employers. But there are multiple types of Social Security benefits: the retirement, disability, survivors, and supplemental benefits. And as you look at the history of Social Security, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act in 1935. And by 1937, a Social Security board had been established that assigned Social Security numbers until 1972. Since 1972, the numbers had been issued from Baltimore, a central location. And I do want to point out that prior to that time, pensions were provided, military pensions were provided, again, post-war. So that's how people survived. There were some communities that also provided assistance to poorer people, poorer inhabitants. So again, Social Security took over a much larger role. If you think about the 1920s, 1930s, and the downturn in the economy that impacted so many Americans, this is why it resulted. Now, do you know where your grandfather worked when he first applied for a Social Security card? Well, up to 1947, the Social Security card applications included the applicant's employer and employer's address. Now, someone you are seeking may not have applied for a Social Security number because it wasn't needed until Medicare benefits began in 1965 for those 65 and older. And the U.S. military started using Social Security numbers in 1967 in place of military service numbers. I went into the military in 1964, so I had a military service number that changed after I get married in 1968 to my Social Security number. And in 1972, the Social Security Administration allowed we're allowed to issue numbers to legally admitted aliens upon entry, and to obtain evidence of age and citizenship, or alien status and identity. And that's a key point. Again, politically right now, that the key point is being able to prove who you are, whether you're a citizen, non-citizen, what's your age, and what's your true identity. Now, conversely, there's if you have a railroad worker in your family tree, up until 1962, railroad employees were assigned. Up until 1963, they were assigned Social Security numbers in a different series. The series was 700 to 728, a different factor. Now, what information is available from Social Security records? Now, there are a couple of different kinds of records. Our information is available from the application for Social Security, the form SS5, and information from the claims folder for the past recipients of the benefits. And again, if you want to glean information on living people, as well as those who have passed away, you need to get a Freedom of Information Act request. And we mentioned that Social Security didn't start until 1936. So they have no records about people who died before then, obviously. And here's one interesting privacy issue. A deceased person does not have any privacy rights. So therefore, if he or she applied for a Social Security number, the SS5 can generally be provided. And one of the key things about this document, it contains the person's name, date, and place of birth, and parents' names that were given when he or she applied for that number. So again, it's a fantastic source for finding information about your relative and their parents. Now, one of them that we most normally see is the Social Security Death Index. And since 1962, the Social Security Administration has used a computer to maintain the records of 60 million deaths that have been reported to them. And the Social Security Death Index comes from the same source, the Social Security Administration records. And they include the number, the last name, first name, date of death, date of birth, zip code of last residence, and zip code of lump sum payments to a recipient. Now, who are all of those people in the SSDI? Here's the criteria. They had to have a Social Security number, and their death had to be reported to the Social Security Administration. So if the death was never reported to the Social Security Administration, they're not an SSDI. Now, one of the key things that's interesting, again, you're able to identify things. The first 3 digits of a Social Security number is an area number and are assigned by geographical region. So again, if you went around the room here, you'd find out, in terms of that our numbers are not the same. Mine's 015, so that's Boston, that general area. And since 72, when they began assigning numbers and issuing cards from Baltimore, the area number is based upon the zip code in the mailing address on the application. So again, the mailing address may not be the same as the person's place of residence. So you have to understand the difference. Now, where can I find a Social Security number? Well, a whole host of different documents. The death certificate should have it. Military records in 67 should have it. The funeral home that handles burial arrangements may have it, and they may, as a matter of record, provide the information of the deceased to the Social Security Administration. A life insurance policy or death claim may list it. And here, again, in this state, you can have your Social Security number as your license number. I don't. I didn't do that at all, but you can. And if you look around again, there may be information provided to minor children relative to Social Security benefits. So again, look around the house and you'll always want to see, again, in a file box, what is there? So again, the key thing is the Social Security Index is a fantastic tool. As you take a look for why would I want to search for it? Again, it's the information resource. One of the key things, they provide the full name, date, birth, and place, parents, spouse information. And again, these things are critical as we do our research and are able to develop a better and clearer view of our particular relative. Now, there are 3 sets of records of particular interest. And the first is the Social Security Death Index. The second is the SS5 or the application. And the third is the Social Security Application and Claims Index. So these are the 3 ways to find Social Security information. Those are the 3 tools. Now the SS5, that's the application. And then claim, it did have the Social Security number, the full name, including the woman's maiden name, address at the time of application, employer's address on pre-1947 applications only, age at last birthday, date and place of birth, parent's full name, including the mother's maiden name, sex, color, and whether the applicant had previously applied for a Social Security or railroad retirement. It also contains the application date and the applicant's actual signature. Now, what is SSDI? Now, key is who's not in the SSDI. Everyone who received a Social Security number or paid withholding tax is not necessarily in the database. And everyone who receives Social Security benefits is not necessarily in the database. So who are all those people in the SSDI? Number one, they had a Social Security number, and number two, their death was reported to the Social Security Administration. So that's a key. Death has to be reported. Otherwise, they don't know. Now, what do you find in the SSDI? Well, you have a death date and location of last residence. So what can it help you do? Find an obituary in a local newspaper to determine the death place. Then you can perhaps request a death certificate or contact the funeral home for any records they may have. You have a location where the person's lump sum distribution was sent. So you're able to perhaps search online for the last name of the person you think may have received the benefits and contact them. And if you happen to have the Social Security number, you can request their SS5, your application. Now, what is the Social Security Claims, Applications, and Claim Index? These are extracts of claims filed with the administration and include life claims for disability or retirement benefits, death claims for survivor benefits, applications for a replacement Social Security card, or applications for changes to a Social Security card itself, i.e. a name change for a woman to get married. So again, my wife had to file for hers, obviously, and you ladies here perhaps had to do the same thing. Now let me do this. Let me go here and show you, again, there are a couple of places where you can get Social Security information. Ancestry is one and Fold 3 is another. And let me see if I can do this one here. And get back to okay, and new share. Okay, now I'm going to do this for my father, and what I'm going to do is do the first regular general search, and then I can show you how to do it specifically, because I want to show you what shows up. This is all categories. Okay, the first thing is I'll put my father's name in, same as mine, fortunately, so I can spell it. What I'm sorry. Okay, the question was, can I do a search without a birth year? The answer is yes, but again, you get many more, many more records. The key is a location helps dramatically. And what even Ancestry itself recommends is take a guess, a wild guess, even at the year itself, in that context, because what happens is it reduces the search itself in terms of the number of answers from that search. Now, what I typically do is start with the broader search, in most cases. You can see he has his draft card. Now, here are two different things. Now, this is the Social Security Application and Claims Index. What does it provide? His name, gender, race, birth date, birthplace, death date, his father's name, mother's name, his Social Security number. And again, so it gives you some insights in terms of what this one did provide. And there's another one here, and I'm going to go back. Let's go to Social Security Death Index first. this is what it shows. Let me go back. Okay. You want to this one here. Okay. The question was the notes on here. 1938 listed as Alfred Sylvester Brothers, and in 2002 the name was listed as Alfred S. Brothers. Same thing, as you just used an initial and not the full name. Now let's go to the Social Security birth index. The Massachusetts. Now I want to find the here's the Social Security death index. Now this, you can see the difference in the two in terms of what information is available. Again, it gives the Social Security number's birth date, the fact that the Social Security card was issued before 1951, where it was issued, his last residence, he was in a nursing home in Canton, Massachusetts, and his death date. So this is what is on the SSDI as compared to the claims. Now here is the Massachusetts death index. And again, this is in comparison, it has his name, death place, death date, his birth date, and his wife, my mother, Edith Yates. So again, each one of these records has slightly different information associated with them. So again, it's a great tool as you look for it. Now, let me go to search again here. Actually, go home. And if you get down below, again, these are fantastic. Just the quick links. And again, you can find military birth and death records right here. And the featured collections on the side here, the Social Security death index. So again, if you click that one, this is going to come up. So you can in fact search for your relative or your ancestor using this particular tool. So it's a fantastic tool to use. So again, as I mentioned, now the difference in fold 3 is geared for military records. The SSDI, in fact, shows up in that one as well. So again, it's another way of verifying. Also in fold 3, you'll have the VA information associated with it. So that's the difference between the two. Now, how do I get the application? Well, you can mail your request to Baltimore, or you can go to the Social Security website and file a request online. And it does cost money, but again, that's one way. And the second question is, where will I find the SSDI information? You can find it online at 4 websites and at the Allen County Public Library using our resources here. Now, these are the 4, and there's difference. MyHeritage does not include the Social Security number in the database. Family Search does not include the Social Security number. Ancestry only provides Social Security numbers for individuals deceased before 2004. And Find My Past provides Social Security numbers through 2012. So again, you can see Ancestry and Find My Past provides more information about Social Security numbers than the other two. Now, as we went through over this particular period of time, 3 different topics, cluster research can help you find gaps and provide information that you need. City directories can yield many different kinds of information. I can't spell information. Oh, that's late night. And Social Security records are a fantastic resource. And the key for any one of these 3 is understand the limitations associated with the records themselves. Who provides the information, how the information is gleaned, and then how you actually access it. So are there any additional questions? Okay, and any additional questions here? Please, go ahead. The question was because many of our African American communities were destroyed. Did they have city directories? I'll mute myself and you can answer.
And I didn't turn my video back on, okay?
Okay.
You've disabled me. Okay, all right. So the question is if whether or not African-American communities that were destroyed, did they have city directories? Oftentimes, smaller communities are absorbed into a larger community. So you always want to look, you always want to take a look at that as well. Then there's groupings also, smaller communities going into county directories. So if they existed to begin with, yes, they should be included in that, in those directories. You just have to figure out if whether or not, and if most of them were small, that's all there is to it. So they would have been absorbed into county and or larger metropolitan directories. So I would go there to try to find them and see what information is broken out, because it'll say it'll usually identify what smaller communities are included in those groupings like that. It'll have like for loss, how can I say? Let's go with Marion, Alabama. Okay, Marion, Alabama has quite a few small communities. Sprout, I think, is one of them, and then there's Brown, yeah, okay, and then there's another one that I'm thinking of, but at any rate, I know there's at least 4 or 5. So when you look into Marion, chances are that's where you're going to find those listings. And there's other, I mean, Fort Wayne, you know, there's New Haven, there's Waynedale, there's, you know, those types of areas. That's how you want to look at them. Does that answer your question? I wanted to respond or add to, we really didn't get into it with the Social Security. With the Social Security information that's available for you when you do the SS5, there's always there's also an opportunity to get a record called a numerate document. And that is specifically good for women when you're trying to follow the history of women, because when women get married, their last names change. And sometimes if you're up against a brick wall, as far as if whether or not that woman ever married or not and was working and would have had Social Security taken out, then that would change. Her name changes, and they keep a track of, this is the maiden name, this is the first marriage. It'll actually say when that person got married. If that person married a third time or a second time or a third time, it'll have the history. That is called the numerate record. That's something that you can request when you go online to request the Social Security record of that individual. There's also the opportunity to request that record as well. So pay close attention to that as you're doing research on women in your family genealogy. And of course, that didn't start until 1935. So marriages were pretty significant during that time. So you might want to take a look at that. I just wanted to throw that on there. Didn't think to print that document, to print that document out, but we can get that, all right? Anybody else have any questions about the topics today? Dr. Brothers, as always, you knock it out of the park, and we're always happy to get together on more, sometimes people are reluctant to ask the question publicly. So make sure you send us an email so that we can address it for you, and go into that Social Security source and look at, Dr. Brothers, can you go back to the screen that actually shows the Social Security inquiry at the bottom of Ancestry? In case a lot of people don't pay attention to all that fine print at the bottom, it can be overwhelming at times. And while you're out there making all those special notes, just make sure you think in terms of the time period of when people went to work. I think they really started, it was mandatory by 1965. Is that what, is that I recall?
65 because it's mandatory for Medicare. That's when it became mandatory.
Okay. We were having conversation about Social Security being effective the 1935, as you can see on the screen there, and that you had to have one for death claim. Is that it? 1965, Dr. Brothers? Yeah, 1965. But you'll notice that a lot of times on the Social Security information, it has that statement prior to 1951. And if my information is correct, that is when they were starting to require everybody to register for a Social Security card. It came into effect 1935, but in 1950, 51, everybody was supposed to get one, start filing, you know, to have a Social Security card. And during that time period, a lot of women weren't working out of the house up until that time. They were, and it wasn't tracking their income. And that was another issue. So let's keep in mind, there's a reason that the government does what it does. And so if you a presentation that I did in the past pertaining to beauty and barbershop industry. And there was the kitchen beautician, and women were earning money that they could actually send their kids to school and clothe them better and feed them better without having a handout, because they had a skill and a trade that was a service to the community, because it also helped African-American women get better jobs in mainstream America because of the image that they were looking for from these women. And right about that 1935 time, they're going, they making money and we're not getting any of it. so that was a big push, and they were doing door to door, knocking on the doors, finding out who's curling hair, who's got that hot comb steaming up in the kitchen, and how much money are they making at that. So that wasn't the only thing, but there were other professions that were under the radar. So that's got a lot to do with that whole Social Security issue. And Dr. Brothers, I'm gonna fire it back over to him. At the bottom of that screen, does it not tell us about requesting that information for the SS5? And I don't know if does it say something about the numerants? Let's see. Connection with includes connections of old data as well as additional names. Go back up. Underneath where it says search, over at the bottom of the screen. Under there. I know when you click on it, the numerant information is there, but we won't hold up everybody else's progress, but do take the time to look on that to see if that, and again, as Dr. Brothers stated, it does cost, but you'll be, depending on what your brick walls are, what you're really trying to find out, it may be worth the money. And it's a whole lot cheaper than going to Washington, DC to try to find it. Trust me on that one. And let's see now, let's hold up here. Let's see, administration, birthday, information you may find, going down a little bit. Okay. Submitted. Okay, so that last sentence there, at the bottom of that first paragraph, it says that, okay, a duplicate social security number usually used when an application was made to replace a social security card. It may also indicate a change in social security number or that more than one social security card or social security number was assigned. And some records may include unusual abbreviations, truncated entries for county and other names, punctuation errors, etc. I thought it actually had it in there, but the truth of the matter is the numerate is the history on a woman if she ever changed her name or got married. So that's something that you can look at.
Well, thank you all very much, and I appreciate it. Please feel free to, to email us or reach out to us on Facebook. We'll hold this once a month on typically on the third Saturday of the month, and so we look forward to getting together with you again next month. And so at this point in time, I'll say thank you very much and good night. Thank you.
I will also mention that if you are not a member of our Facebook page, you can search for us at AAGSFW. You can also send us an email at AAGSFW@gmail.com. We have a monthly television show, Ancestors and Answers, that airs, it streams live on our Facebook page. You can go to our Facebook page or send us an email for information about that. And also our upcoming events, we send out a mass email. And so if you haven't put your email in the chat, please do so that you can receive that information for August. So thank you so much for joining us, and that'll be all for today.
Thank you, Linda Durrell from Fort Wayne. Now, were you guys aware that the third Thursday, the IAGG also meets? They've been meeting on third Thursday for 20 years.
We were not aware of that. We actually have our own schedule that we've been meeting. The monthly meetings have been the second Thursday of the month, and the TV shows have been the second Wednesday of the month. So
yeah,
all of that's on our
those are
Facebook
great.
page.
But the Indiana African American Genealogy Group, they meet on the third Thursday. So what I did was I clicked on them at noon, and then I clicked on you guys at noon at 1, and your topics were similar with the collateral research. But if you could have it later on the third Thursday or earlier on the third Thursday, it would help.
Well,
I don't
we'll
remember
consider
you
that.
guys having third Thursday. That's
Yeah. Well, thank you for letting us know, Linda, and thank you for joining.
Yes, thank you.